Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are having a pleasant break. Today, we're going to talk about the Neo-Assyrian period once again. So we remember where we've been in Mesopotamia and in Egypt over time, and we've come out of the Late Bronze Age, which was this period during which we had all these different things going on. We had the Middle Babylonian Kingdom and the beginnings of the Middle Assyrian Kingdom at the same time as Egypt's New Kingdom, the Hittite Old Kingdom, the Mitanni, the Hittite Empire. This was all going on more or less at the same time. But we heard about how the Late Bronze Age um, Great Powers Club fell apart. And now we've moved into this time period when we have the Neo-Assyrian period happening at the same time as the Third Intermediate period. So take a second and think about what we learned last time about the Neo-Assyrian period and the Third Intermediate period. Okay, so as we know, during the Neo-Assyrian period, we kind of have these two eras, right? So during the first half of the Neo-Assyrian period, the Assyrians are gradually expanding out from their heartland, which is right in this area around Nineveh and Ashur. And here's Kalhu, which is that interesting palace with all the art that we talked about last time. So they gradually expand out from here into this dark green region. So by the time of King Shalmaneser III, they have this whole dark green region. However, they continue to expand during the second phase of the new Assyrian Empire, and they also pick up this lighter green area, even taking over parts of Elam and getting into northern Arabia. They take over Canaan and Syria, and they even briefly hold on to Egypt. That's something we talked about last time. Here again is our list of kings, and we have the kings before the red line who are during this kind of earlier period when the empire is reconquering what had been held by their Middle Assyrian forebears, and then this later period when they're expanding beyond that. Last time we talked about a number of these kings, including Ashurnasirpal II and his palace at Kalhu, Shalmaneser III, who repeatedly fought the Hamath coalition, and he had those interesting royal annals. Then, during the later period, we talked about Tiglath-Pileser III, who was this very successful military leader, and he had his faithful vassal Panamua of Samal. We also talked a little bit about his successor, Shalmaneser V, and his disloyal vassal, Hoshea, king of Israel. And then we kind of briefly introduced Sargon, Sennacherib, and Esarhaddon. Now, we didn't quite get to our last slide last time. It was a very weird stopping point. Sorry about that. But as you guys can see, after Esarhaddon, we have this guy, Ashurbanipal, right? And this is where it all starts to fall apart for the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Through the time of Tiglath-Pileser up through Esarhaddon, things have been going pretty well. There had been some occasional speed bumps, but pretty much Assyria had been very powerful, unrivaled, nobody could stop them. But then we come to this time of Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal was a pretty competent king. However, he had made a big mistake. We talked last time about how this kind of ongoing conflict between Assyria and Babylon was just becoming more and more problematic. And there were these times when they would take over Babylon and other times when they'd be allies with Babylon because Babylon had this really special ideological position, right? And we heard about how Sennacherib, so Ashurbanipal's grandpa, had taken Babylon multiple times because he was fighting this ongoing battle with this guy, Marduk-apla-iddina, this Aramean Chaldean guy who kept taking over Babylon. And finally, he was so mad that he like partially destroyed the city and stole all the gods and flooded the city. And probably because of this, he ends up getting assassinated. And his son Esarhaddon had tried to kind of fix this massive PR disaster, but with limited success, right? So Ashurbanipal inherits this problem, and he puts his brother Shamash-shum-ukin in charge of the city of Babylon. He's once again kind of thinking, hey, um, my brother, he'll kind of give them their own feeling that they're being respected, so they have this Assyrian prince as their very own king. He's hoping this will smooth things out. However, Shamash-shum-ukin is not loyal to his brother Ashurbanipal. Instead, he conspires with the king of Elam to try to take Babylon independent. Ashurbanipal is really furious about this, and so he goes down and he fights the Elamites and he kills the king of Elam and hangs his head on the wall, but he leaves Shamash-shum-ukin in charge. So it seems like Shamash-shum-ukin was able to deny that he'd been involved in this whole thing, and so he's left in charge in Babylon. Well, to no one's surprise, Shamash-shum-ukin rebels again, and so Ashurbanipal's like, all right, okay. So he takes his army down there and besieges the city of Babylon for 3 years. In 648, he finally gets into the city. As soon as Shamash-shum-ukin hears that Ashurbanipal has broken into the city, he burns down the Babylonian palace on his own head and dies. Um, I feel like you could have surrendered 3 years ago and saved a lot of people's lives. I think that would have been smarter. Anyway, Ashurbanipal then goes and he campaigns through Elam, destroys a bunch of cities there, and deports a lot of its citizens, which once again is going to leave even more of a power vacuum for the Persians and the Medians to become more powerful in that region. All right. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to be focusing today on the time of Sargon and Sennacherib, and we're going to talk about a number of primary sources and articles that are related to them. So our primary source that we'll talk about is Sargon's 8th campaign. And then we have these two articles we're going to discuss: the Assyrian Intelligence Service in the days of Sargon and Sennacherib versus Judah in the Lachish reliefs. And then we're going to introduce divination during the Neo-Assyrian period. Okay. So if we want to talk about our primary source, which is Sargon's 8th campaign, we have to quickly remember who Sargon is. He's ruling in the mid to late 700s, and his name, Sargon, means legitimate king. No king who ever came to the throne properly has ever named themselves this. There's various evidence that he probably murdered his brother Shalmaneser V in order to get the throne. He was militarily very successful for most of his rule. He reconquered the city of Babylon. He fought in Anatolia and Urartu. He founds a new capital. But ultimately, he's going to die fighting with the Sumerians in Anatolia. All right, what was going on with his 8th campaign? During his 8th campaign, he was fighting against the kingdom of Urartu to the north. This kingdom is largely around Lake Van. So this is a picture of Lake Van for you. You can see it's very pretty. So in this text of Sargon's 8th campaign, Sargon II describes his campaign north against the kingdom of Urartu and other smaller kingdoms between Assyria and Urartu in 718 BCE. He sets up this text as a letter to the god Ashur, which was originally intended to be read out before the god by Sargon's best orator. The letter may also have been read during the yearly kind of festivals of Ashur or during royal triumphal processions. During this campaign, this is basically where he goes. He starts out around the area of Kalhu. His capital, Dur-Sharrukin, is here. And then he is going up through these regions. He gets up onto the edge of Lake Van, near where Tushpa is. He also kind of circles back through Mutsatsir, which is also a very important city for the Urartians. So he's kind of circling through here. You can kind of see on the map, this is a very mountainous region. You're taking your army through a lot of narrow passes, over a lot of mountains. It's quite difficult terrain, which is one of the reasons it was so difficult for the Assyrians to deal with the Kingdom of Urartu. In this text, Sargon not only describes his military activities, he also gives us a lot of wonderful descriptions of the terrain and of the people who live in these regions, all kinds of really interesting ethnographic details that probably are coming from reports about the terrain, about the people. These kinds of things are being incorporated into this text by the scribes who are working on it. One of the ways they include a lot of terrain details is by over and over again showing that Sargon isn't just victorious over human enemies, he's victorious over nature. He has the power to leap tall mountains in a single bound, and this is something that they really want to describe him as. So here's one example. As for Mount Samiriu, a lofty peak that thrusts up sharp as a spear point, whose roots below thrust down to the depths of the netherworld, on the sides of which yawn chasms and mountain ravines, a fearsome spectacle to behold, I provided my engineers with heavy copper mattocks, so they broke up the sharp peak of the mountain into fragments as if it was limestone, and made good the going. I made the chariotry, cavalry, and my combat troops fly over it like valiant eagles. So here we have this description of the terrain, Mount Samiriu. We first get this nice metaphor about how it's thrusting up sharp as a spear point, and then this turns into kind of a cosmic mountain. So its roots below go all the way down to the underworld. It's got chasms, it's got mountain ravines, it's a scary place. And so we then get this very um, suddenly more practical description of how Sargon handled this. He sent his military engineers out with heavy copper mattocks to basically break up parts of the mountain to make a road. So this is really fun, the way we have in this text this alternation between very kind of mythic literary description and these more kind of practical details. Here's another example. They also go over these heavily forested mountains. So I crossed the Upper Zob, narrow mountain ledges that defy description, through which mighty cascades have cut their way. Every kind of tree, shrub, and vine grows in a tangle like a canebrake. I cut through their dense growth and broke up their narrow ridges with bronze axes. I made good going for my army with a narrow passage. I put my riding chariot on shoulders and proceeded on horseback at the head of my troops. So this ledge was so narrow he didn't feel safe riding in his chariot, so he went on horseback and then he made his dudes disassemble and carry his chariot behind him. And they go single file through this narrow passage. We also get a lot of really interesting kind of side details about this area that are being incorporated here. I crossed the 7 mountains of Sinaholzi, remote ranges whose vegetation is pleasant-smelling wild leek and aromatic. So he even knows what kinds of plants are there to scent the air. Then later we get this discussion of some of the people. The people who live in that district of all the peoples of Urartu have no equal in the training of riding horses. Every year they take the promising young foals born in their extensive land, which they raise for the royal military. So we can think about what having details like this adds to the text. It really shows how much knowledge the Assyrians had about the area and about the terrain. And by putting this all in Sargon's first-person voice, it seems like he's this nearly omniscient, nearly omnipotent figure who's able to conquer nature and who knows everything about the landscape he's moving through, even though it isn't technically part of Assyria. So the whole world even if it's not part of Assyria, still answers to Sargon. Now, what happens, according to Sargon, in this campaign? Sargon is heading north, and he has immediately this one vassal, Ulasunu the Manaean, who comes out to meet him with a gift. And Ulasunu just begs Sargon, please push Rusa, the king of Urartu, out of Manaean territory. Get him out of here. He's raiding me. He's causing me all kinds of problems. Now, Sargon, being a kind and benevolent ruler, immediately decides to help out his poor, pathetic vassal. I took pity on them. I promised them to defeat the land of Urartu and to bring relief to the troubled peoples of the land of the Manaeans. So, why did Sargon have to go to war? He had to go to war because Rusa and the Urartians were harassing Sargon's poor innocent vassals. So, Sargon's not an aggressive guy. He is just helping his vassals. Now, Sargon describes himself in certain ways, and he describes Rusa of Urartu in certain ways. So, this would be a good time for you guys to pause the video and go and do the in-class activity for today, which has been posted on Canvas. It's called Rusa versus Sargon. Go ahead and do that, and then come back to the video. In addition to being victorious over nature and knowledgeable about the landscape, Sargon can't be stopped by any kind of human force either. So multiple times in this text, he describes the great fortresses of the Urartian people and other kingdoms that were allied to Urartu, and how these fortresses did absolutely nothing to stop him. I arrived at Ushkaya, a great fortress which is the frontier post of Urartu. When the people of that district saw the rout of Rusa their lord, they abandoned their goods and took the road of no return. What is he talking about? He's saying there's this super powerful border fortress, but when people heard I was coming, they didn't even bother to retreat into their super powerful border fortress. They just all ran away because they knew the fortress would do nothing to stop me. This happens again at Tarawi and Tarmakisa, mighty fortresses. Their fortifications are particularly strong. Their outer walls solid, their moats surrounding their perimeters extra deep. The people forsook their settlements and fled into a dry wasteland. Once again, the people don't even try to fight Sargon. They abandon their extremely strong fortresses and run away. So Sargon goes, he fights with Rusa a couple of times, and then Rusa kind of withdraws, right? As you saw in your in-class activity. But this doesn't end the campaign. During my return march, says Sargon, Urzana of Mutsatsir, that criminal and malefactor, who transgressed an oath to the gods, who did not acknowledge my lordship, a vicious mountain man, who, breaking a loyalty oath to Ashur, Shamash, Nabu, and Marduk, rebelled against me, interrupted the progress of my return march by... Did he attack? Did he try to assassinate Sargon? Did he throw rocks at Sargon? Did he throw rotten fruit at Sargon? No. He interrupted the progress of my return march by not doing homage to me with a massive greeting gift from him. He withheld his tribute payment and gift, nor did he send a single courier to greet me. Well, so this terrible criminal who didn't come to greet you with a gift. So Sargon is like, okay, I cannot take this disrespect. This guy, he's not coming with a massive greeting gift. He's definitely broken his previous oath of peace and allegiance to me, that he swore before the gods the last time I was up here and forced him to do that. So, time for me to go fight this guy. So, how many men is Sargon going to take to attack him? I prepared just my own single chariot and 1,000 eager soldiers, troops with bow, shield, and spear, my fiercest warriors, veterans of combat, and I took the difficult road to Mutsatsir. So Sargon just goes by himself with 1,000 dudes. This reminds me a little bit of Ramses III at the Battle of Kadesh, right? So he's going to go and yell at Urzana. And how is this going to go? When Urzana sees this army, Urzana is going to kind of react with fear, right? But first, we have to kind of establish why this campaign is important. So Sargon wants to establish how important the city of Mutsatsir is, so he gives us this description of it. The city Mutsatsir, Urzana's royal dwelling, and the dwelling of Khaldi his god, the deity that is highest in the entire extent of the land of Urartu. They know no higher god than he in heaven and earth, without whom neither scepter nor crown is taken up, the symbols of government. The sovereign who governs the people of Urartu, they would bring him and they would present whichever of his sons was to take the throne before Haldi and Mutsatsir with gold and silver and every sort of precious treasure from his palace, and would give him gifts. They would offer huge cattle, fatted sheep beyond number, and prepare a feast for his whole city. In the presence of Haldi his god, they would place on him the crown of lordship, and have him take up the scepter of kingship of Urartu, and the people would hail his name. Against that city I let my troops' battle cry roar like thunder, and the inhabitants, the old men and women of its people, went up on the roofs of their houses to weep bitterly. They groveled on all fours to save their lives. Okay, so why is the city of Mutsatsir important? This is the seat not only of King Urzana of Mutsatsir, it's also the seat of the god Haldi, who was the head of the Urartian pantheon. So there's this massive temple to Haldi there, and he is supposed to be its patron god. So having a foreign army take this city basically means that the foreign powers' gods are more powerful than all of the Urartian gods. That's what they're going to think from the ancient Middle Eastern perspective. There's also a very important kind of political side to the importance of this city. So, what's that? Take a minute and think about it. This city, as we see, is also super important because this is where the kings of Urartu are crowned. They had to be brought to Mutsatsir and crowned in the temple of Haldi. So if something happens to this city, how can you declare a new king in Urartu? You really can't do it legitimately because if you can't invoke Haldi and you can't do this special ritual at the temple, you can't have a legitimate Urartian king. So this is a big deal. So Sargon goes with his 1,000 guys and um, they attack the city of Mutsatsir, and everyone is freaked out by his arrival. If you're wondering what this place is like, this is what the landscape looks like around Mutsatsir. Um, you can't really see the city very well. I think it's on this hill here is where a lot of the city of Mutsatsir was. You can see there's nice agricultural land right here. Sargon probably just came marching straight up here and then up this way. And then over down here, I've given you one of the images from Sargon's art of him attacking the city of Mutsatsir. So you can see all these Assyrians climbing around and fighting the locals up over here. We can see that we've got this walled fortress over here. You can see this palace over here, Zerzana's palace. And then this, I believe, is the Temple of Haldi, because we have these giant lavers or incense burners out here, and the kind of decoration here and the altar in the middle. So this is the Temple of Haldi being depicted in his art. So what ends up happening to this city of Mutsatsir, this holy city of the god Haldi? Sargon deports all the elites of the city and scatters them around, and he also loots the city, taking all the city's valuables, including the temple treasury, showing that the god can't even protect the temple itself from Sargon of Assyria. He gives us this very long list of all the things he stole from them. Here are just a couple of interesting items in that list. Probably what actually happened is when the temple and palace were looted on behalf of the king, there were Assyrian officials whose job it was to make an inventory of some of the stuff. And so these inventory records were drawn upon in the making of this text. So, what are some things he took? A silver bowl belonging to Rusa himself with its lid. Gold keys in the shape of crowned female protective genies. A great sword weighing 26 minas and 3 shekels of gold. That's over 27 pounds of gold. That's a lot. A gold harp for carrying out the rites of the goddess Bagimashtu, the wife of Haldi. A praying statue for the king. This is one of these kind of votive statues that you set up in front of the god so that the king is like forever praying before the god. A praying statue for the king dedicated by a previous king, Sarduri, the son of Ishpuini. A statue of Rusa with 2 horses and his charioteer inscribed, "With my 2 horses and my 1 charioteer did I take over kingship of the land of Urartu." So he's carrying off a lot of very interesting things to his city in Assyria. Now, when Rusa hears about the fall of the city of Mutsatsir, he freaks out. When Rusa heard of this, he collapsed on the ground, tore his garments to shreds, and threw up his hands in despair. He flung away his headgear, tore out his hair, pounded his chest with both hands, then threw himself flat on his face. His heart stood still, his feelings burned within him. Screams of grief rose from his lips. I caused cries of woe to resound throughout all the land of Urartu, and I caused perpetual mourning for the Nairi lands. So Rusa is really upset. When he hears about this, he really freaks out. What he doesn't do is come marching after Sargon with an army. He is still too scared of Sargon to come after him, according to this text. So, what is kind of the overall message that we get here? We see that Sargon is victorious over nature, over strong fortifications, so much better than that pathetic King Rusa in every possible way. Surely Sargon is the best Assyrian king ever. This is really the picture he's trying to give us, and he's also very much trying to tell us that even the lands that are theoretically outside of the Assyrian Empire, he still has power over the nature in those lands. Still has power over the people in those lands. The only reason every single person in the world is not paying taxes to Sargon is because he hasn't gotten around to making them do that yet. There is absolutely nothing that could stand in his way. That is his message. Well, what else do we know about Sargon? Was he really this great? Obviously, the text is exaggerating somewhat, but he was actually quite a competent king. One of the things that he did that was quite impressive is the way he ran the Assyrian Intelligence Service. So let's talk a little bit about the Assyrian Intelligence Service in the days of Sargon II and Crown Prince Sennacherib. We may tend to think of intelligence organizations as being modern inventions, but that's not actually true. Lots of powers of the ancient world were very interested in knowing all sorts of things about what was going on both inside and outside of their empires. But what was going on with Neo-Assyrian intelligence? Before the days of Sargon, Neo-Assyrian intelligence focused on external threats and was not fully organized, so they'd be reporting on things from outside of the Assyrian Empire. However, in the time of Sargon and Sennacherib, they created a fully organized system to keep an eye on both external and internal threats. By the days of Esarhaddon, Sennacherib's son, this intelligence service would shift to focus primarily on internal threats. So by Esarhaddon's time, they're not so much focused on expanding the empire anymore. They're trying to hold on to what they have because they're having a lot of internal problems. So Who had to report as part of this intelligence network? All Assyrian officials were required to report back any interesting intelligence, as were all vassal rulers. This would actually be put in your vassal treaty when you became a vassal of Assyria. It would say things like, if you hear anybody talking against the king of Assyria or making any plans against the king of Assyria or any plans against the empire or any plans to embezzle the money or anything like this, you are required to report it. If something happens in your territory and you don't report it, then the intelligence service will investigate you to try to decide if you're an idiot or if you are complicit. Things are not going to go well for you either way. If they decide that you were just ignorant, they may well remove you from your position because they'll decide you aren't good at your job. If they decide you're complicit, then you get flayed and impaled. So that's not great. There were also quite a lot of undercover operatives who also reported back to the intelligence service, including merchants, princesses who had been given out in marriage alliances, and servants. Trying to keep an eye on this whole system, there were also intelligence auditors called Kepu officials who would go around and they would investigate different provinces and military camps and things, trying to find out if everything was being accurately and completely reported, and if there were any unreported problems. There are also quite a few dedicated intelligence jobs that we know about. So, one of the best known groups here are the patrollers. These are part of the Assyrian army, and they're basically like army scouts. They were based in border forts on the edges of the Assyrian Empire, and they would go out behind enemy lines and collect intelligence from border areas. There were also people called Bataku denouncers. These are locals who regularly passed intelligence back to Assyria, either from border regions or from other problematic regions in the empire, including often the capital cities. There were also people called Shalishanim, tongues. These are people who were sent back to the capital or to other centers to be interrogated because they were believed to have useful knowledge. There are a lot of Assyrian intelligence reports which describe what some of these people had to say. These are often captured enemies. Then people could also be referred to as eyes and ears. This could be anybody, Assyrian or non-Assyrian, who observed something and passed the intelligence to Assyria. What kinds of information were they interested in? They were interested in all kinds of different info. Of course, they're interested in enemy movements, enemy plans, and gatherings of enemy forces, but they're also interested in local developments within Assyria, the attitudes of local people toward Assyria or towards specific officials. So if there's a specific official who's giving the Assyrian Empire a bad name, the people want to know that. They also report on things about the terrain that might be useful in future military campaigns. They report about agriculture so that the Assyrian government can keep track of whether people are actually paying the correct amount of taxes, whether they really had the drought that they say they did that reduced the amount of tax being paid, that kind of thing. Also, information acquired via divination. So anything that they are trying to pass on from the gods or from divination. These are things that were collected as being just as important as first-person reports of enemy movements, for example, and so on. So all kinds of information is being collected. How did this work? Reports were collected regionally by officials at regional Assyrian centers. The local officials there would try to verify the reports, try to make sure that they were actually saying something that was true, and then they would add that information. I was able to verify this. I wasn't able to verify that. They would add that information, and then results of this verification and copies of original reports were sent to the office of the Chief of Intelligence, Asher Reshua, in sealed envelopes. So there was a constant string of messengers going across the landscape with these sealed reports for Ashur-Reshua. Crown Prince Sennacherib, during the rule of his father, was deeply involved with this office, and in fact, he seems to have been kind of the second in command of the intelligence force under Ashur-Reshua. So he was very well trained in this, and he clearly had a lot of analytical skill. Depending on what the chief's office thought of these reports, they might send back for additional clarification and information. And then Ashur-Reshua, Sennacherib, or other high officers in the intelligence office often prepared summary briefings for King Sargon, some of which we have kind of their cuneiform notes for. Here's an example of a letter which Sennacherib, Crown Prince Sennacherib, sends to his father Sargon about some things that have been going on. Okay? To the king, my lord, your servant Sinache Eriba. Good health to the king, my lord. Assyria is well, the temples are well, all the king's forts are well. The king, my lord, can be glad indeed. So he seems to be writing this letter because he's back in the Assyrian heartland where these reports are being collected, and his father Sargon is out on campaign, so he's sending him this report. They're working on the fort in the city of Kuma. Their work is making good progress. A messenger of Aria has come into my presence with the following message. The ruler of Uku has written to the Urartian king that the governors of the king of Assyria are building a fort in Kuma, and the Urartian king has given his governors the following order. Take your troops, go and capture the governors of the king of Assyria alive from the Kumeans and bring them to me. I do not have the full details yet. This is Aria's report. I do not have the full details yet. As soon as I've heard more, I shall write by express to the crown prince that they should rush troops to me. This was the report of Aria. So let me take apart what's happening here. This messenger has come from Aria, who's one of these regional Assyrian officials. And Aria is giving this report that's shown in blue. And part of what he's saying is this supposed order that the Urartian king has given shown in red. So Aria sent the message in blue, which had embedded this order in red. And then this whole letter is by Sennacherib. So Sennacherib is sending on this report to Sargon. And we see Aria here saying, I don't have the full details yet. I don't know everything that's going to happen, but you guys should be expecting that at some point soon here, if I can verify this, I'm going to write and ask for troops to be rushed to me so we can deal with this threat. Sennacherib then goes on and reports a message that he got from Ashur-Reshua. On the 11th of Elul, I got a letter from Ashur-Reshua, and then this letter is what's in blue. The Urartian did not achieve anything on the venture on which the Zakurtians took him, but had to return empty-handed. He went with his troops to Waisi, entered the city, and left his forces there. Taking but a few troops with him, he set out and entered into the territory of the Manaeans. I have not heard about the invasion yet, but I shall write you as soon as I've heard more. The governor opposite me was also in Waisi. I have heard that he left and went off after the king's departure, but no one has seen him come out of Waisi. They're improving the roads leading to me and constructing bridges. As soon as I have heard what it is all about, whether he is coming with his troops or whether he is clean, I shall immediately write to the crown prince. This was the report of Ashur-Reshua. So do you guys understand what's going on here? He's reporting on this campaign that the king of Urartu had, and there is this suspicion about the governor opposite Ashur-Reshua who had been in Waisi, and it seems like he may have betrayed them to the Urartians, potentially. So this is going on. And once again, we see these remarks. I've not heard about the invasion yet, but I shall write you as soon as I've heard more. As soon as whether I've heard what it's all about, whether he's coming with his troops or whether he's clean, I shall write to the crown prince. So Ashur-Reshua is also following this procedure of summarizing and verifying and sending on the information. This complex and competent intelligence service really helped the Assyrian emperors a lot. It allowed them to succeed in many campaigns because they had the knowledge of the terrain that they needed, they had the knowledge of the people, they knew who was for them, who was against them, they knew how much military power their enemies had. And this also allowed them to deal with threats early. So, in a number of cases, we can tell from the letters that we have that they were able to identify threats before they could actually, like invasions before they could happen, or assassination attempts before they could happen. And sometimes they were able to deal with this through black ops. So we have in the letters, for example, assassinations being ordered of various disloyal vassals and these sorts of things to keep them off the field of battle. So this helped to support the Assyrian emperors. So it's really quite an interesting subject to consider. So Sargon was a pretty competent guy, and his son Sennacherib is there in the office, also clearly very competent at dealing with the intelligence service. All right, we're about halfway through, so if you want to pause the video and give yourself a break, this is a good moment to do that. I'm going to get a drink. All right, we're back again. So, we're now going to turn our focus from Sargon, who was our ruler in his 8th campaign text, and who sort of put into place the Assyrian intelligence service. We're now going to turn our focus to his son Sennacherib, by talking about Sennacherib's Lachish reliefs. Forward, forward. There we go. So we want to remember what the deal is with Sennacherib. Sennacherib is ruling from the late 700s into the early 600s, and he had had quite a few struggles during his time as a ruler. Babylon immediately rebelled when Sargon died, as did many of the other vassal kingdoms. Sennacherib then had to go around and kind of retake a lot of these vassal kingdoms, and he also retook the city of Babylon. We remember that he damaged the city and then had to rebuild it because people were nervous about this damage to the holy city. Later on, Babylon really severely damaged Babylon after the death of his son and kidnapped its gods to Assyria. And then in 681, he was assassinated by some of his sons. However, early in his reign, there was no sign of these kind of terrible events that were going to happen later. Instead, he's just facing the problem that a lot of his vassal kingdoms have rebelled against him. So, in his 3rd to 4th year of rule, about 701 BCE, Sennacherib has his 3rd campaign. Sennacherib receives intelligence through the Assyrian intelligence service of a rebellion in Canaan, led by the king of Tyre and Hezekiah, the king of Judah. Hezekiah is a figure who's talked about quite a bit in the Hebrew Bible, in the books of Kings and Chronicles and Isaiah. So if you're interested to learn more about him, you can look over there. One of the things that had happened is that Sennacherib's faithful vassal, Patti, the king of Ekron, had been captured and was being held prisoner by Hezekiah. Sennacherib is not okay with this. So he comes and he campaigns against both Tyre and Judah. He besieges the city of Tyre, and then he goes and he destroys many of Judah's fortified cities, including the city of Lachish, and rescues his vassal Patti of Ekron. However, there's a long-standing question about this campaign, which is, did he take Jerusalem? And if not, why not? So Jerusalem, of course, being the capital of the Kingdom of Judah. So scholars have argued about this campaign a lot. Part of the reason why is that Sennacherib commissioned a ton of art related to this campaign, which decorates his palace in Nineveh. So similarly to Ashurnasirpal II, Sennacherib also created a beautiful new palace with a lot of art in it, which conveys a lot of the same kinds of messages of Assyrian power and piety. So in his art, he has a lot of art about this specific campaign against Tyre and Judah, but he says very little about the campaign in his royal annals. By this point, the royal annals of each king were often this very detailed kind of running account. And it would be like, in this year, I went on my third campaign, and this is all the stuff I did. And then in the next year, I went on my fourth campaign, and this is all the stuff I did. If you look at the publications of these annals, some of these annals go on for dozens and dozens and dozens of pages. They would be inscribed in the walls of the palaces and also in texts that would be read out during different festivals and processions. So these royal annals were a big deal to the Assyrian kings. So why did Sennacherib say so little about this campaign in his annals? What's going on with this? He's campaigning, of course, against Tyre, which is right up here. It's not in this picture, and against Judah, so he kind of comes down the coastline and then against Judah here. Sorry. Lachish is right about here, and then Jerusalem is here. So one of the things that he depicts in great detail in his palace in Nineveh is the siege of the city of Lachish. Lachish was the fortress city that guarded one of the main approaches to the city of Jerusalem. It was a very well fortified city, and it's really interesting. An entire room in Sennacherib's new palace that he built, the Palace Without Rival, is decorated with reliefs of this siege of the city of Lachish. So Lachish was known as being this really powerful fortified city. Here's a reconstruction of what the Palace Without Rival probably looked like. You can see that we've got this large and extensive area with this kind of taller structure in the middle. It's not exactly a ziggurat, but it's kind of ziggurat-like. It also would draw the eye from a long distance away. So that's the Palace Without Rival there. And here's Tel Lachish. There's not a whole lot left of the actual fortification because this fortress went through several wars. A little bit later, it's going to go through a war with Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and that's not going to be great. But you can still, they've reconstructed over here the massive gate and some of the walls. And you guys see how there's like rocks everywhere all over the surface of this? This is because originally there was a big wall down here, and then there was another wall here, and then there was another wall around the top. This tell itself is very steep, so you wouldn't want a situation where, the people of Lachish are up here on the top behind their wall shooting down at you and you're trying to come up this slope. You would not really want to be doing that. Here's some of the reconstructed fortifications. This is one of the towers. And here is the massive gate leading into the city of Lachish. We have this stone courtyard in front of it, and we have a gate with multiple rooms going to the sides where you could either have storage or you could have gate guards, or you could perhaps even station a horse so that you could run messages. So this is what the gate looks like there, now that it's been reconstructed. Now, here's the Palace Without Rival. This is a top plan of the Palace Without Rival. You can see we have tons and tons and tons of all these different side rooms. We have this kind of larger audience chamber where the king would often sit to receive certain select envoys and things like that. He'd be in here. Out here, this is the great courtyard. So this part is not roofed. They had a lot of like palm trees and pots out here and a lot of really interesting art along the walls. If you're in the great courtyard and you go straight in, this room right here is where the Lachish reliefs are. So if you just go straight in from the great courtyard into the palace, where you'll end up is this room full of the Lachish reliefs. Okay? Here are some of the bits of these reliefs. This is a detail from the relief. So we have here Sennacherib sitting on a throne with some guys behind him fanning him, and he is sitting and watching the siege of Lachish. So we have some guys coming up to talk to him and report on how the battle is going, and some different Assyrians kind of here with their pointy Assyrian hats. And here we have over on the side some captured people who are asking for mercy, it seems like. So this is all going on. Here is a drawing of another part of the relief. So it's a little confusing to look at, but this is where Lachish, this is the tell, this is the hill that Lachish is on, and the fortress of Lachish is up here on the top. You can see some of the fortification walls up here, and some more kind of side walls stretching out over here. Do you guys see all the little archers on top of the wall getting ready to shoot at the Assyrians? Now, here are the Assyrians trying to climb up the tell and attack the fortification wall. What eventually ended up happening is they were having so much trouble with the steep sides of the hill that they actually built their own dirt ramp to make it easier for them to get up there. So here we can see a lot of people trying to go up the sides of the tell to attack. We see also this kind of raging fight where the Assyrians are behind this giant movable shield thing while the people of Lachish are shooting down at them. You guys see that? So all this is going on. And then over here we have some other details. We've got some Assyrian people bringing supplies on camels and in wagons for the army. So this is all going on over here on the side. Oh, I also want to point out this tree back here. You guys see this tree? Um, this is genuinely a type of tree that grows in this region. So part of the Assyrian intelligence report on Lachish probably included some information about some of the things that grow here. Here's another picture from the reliefs. You can see some people getting a chariot ready here to go into battle. We've got more depictions of the plants that are growing around here. And here we have a depiction of the Assyrian camp. So showing how the Assyrian camp itself is fortified, and we've got some different stuff in there, and we've got some different tents for important people, as well as places for animals. So this is all going on over here. So that's really cool that we get that picture. If you would like to see more images of these reliefs, you can click through to the British Museum page and you can see how cool all of this is. So if you think back to the art that we looked at in the Palace of Kalhu, what's the impression you get of Sennacherib and the Assyrian army from this art? What what's the sense you get of them? Take a second and think about that. What is the message conveyed by this art? I think you would probably definitely see the power of the Assyrian army, and you would see the Assyrian army having victory over very impressive fortifications. You would also see the detailed knowledge of the region and of the landscape that you're getting in these images. So you would see all of this, how Judah, even if they're trying to fight against Sennacherib, they can't stand against the Assyrian army and its king. Now, what does Sennacherib say in his annals? This is pretty much it here. Moreover, as for Hezekiah, the land of Judah, who is not submitted to my yoke, I surrounded and conquered 46 of his fortified cities, fortresses, and smaller settlements in their environs, which were without number, by having ramps trodden down and battering rams brought up, the assault of foot soldiers, sapping, that's digging under the walls, breaching, that's making holes in the walls, and siege engines. I brought out of them 200,150 people, young and old, male and female, horses, mules, donkeys, camels, oxen, sheep, and goats, which were without number, and I counted them as plunder. So he carries off all of these people from Judah and scatters them around or uses them as servants back in Assyria. As for Hezekiah, I confined him inside the city Jerusalem, his royal city, like a bird in a cage. I set up blockades against him and made him dread exiting his city gate. I detached from his land the cities of his that I had plundered, and gave them to Metinti the king of Ashdod, Patti the king of Ekron, and Silibaal the king of the city of Gaza, and thereby made his land smaller. So the king of Assyria is giving away parts of Judah to these other kings who were loyal to him. To the former tribute, their annual giving, I added the payment of gifts in recognition of my overlordship and imposed it upon them. So because he gave them more cities, he also increased their taxes. As for Hezekiah, fear of my lordly brilliance overwhelmed him, and after my departure, he had the auxiliary forces and his elite troops whom he had brought inside to strengthen the city of Jerusalem, his royal city, thereby gaining reinforcements, along with 30 talents of gold, 800 talents of silver, choice antimony, large blocks of something, ivory beds, armchairs of ivory, elephant hides, elephant ivory, ebony, boxwood, every kind of valuable treasure, as well as his daughters, his palace women, male singers and female singers, brought to Nineveh, my capital city, and he sent a mounted messenger of his to me to deliver this payment and to do obeisance. So, after Sennacherib leaves, Hezekiah sends him this big present to try to get Sennacherib to forgive him for rebelling, according to Sennacherib, which included this massive amount of money, luxury furniture, luxury goods, some of his daughters, his palace women, and his palace entertainers sent to Nineveh, which was Sennacherib's capital city. And they also had this envoy who had to go and sort of submit on behalf of Hezekiah in front of the royal court. So Hezekiah clearly did not win this campaign. He submits to Sennacherib as a vassal, but I want you to notice Sennacherib never mentions taking the city of Jerusalem. He just says, after I left, Hezekiah sent me this great gift. So what's going on here? What happened? Why would Sennacherib only mention this campaign so briefly in his annals, but then make all this art? Why do you guys think that would be? I think this is one of the questions that might turn up on the final exam, so make sure you consider this question. What are some reasons you think this would be? One of the things you can think about is who audiences for text versus art are, and how that would affect what kind of message you're trying to convey. Now, the Hebrew Bible also weighs in on this campaign. The Hebrew Bible also discusses Sennacherib's campaign against Tyre and against Judah. It agrees that Sennacherib took many cities in Judah and received Hezekiah's submission, but that he never actually took the city of Jerusalem. The books of Kings and Chronicles suggest several different reasons why Sennacherib left without taking Jerusalem. Maybe it was just because Hezekiah submitted and sent him a lot of money. We know that Hezekiah did send him a lot of stuff. That's in both the Bible and the Assyrian sources. Maybe Sennacherib was just like, okay, then I've got other things to do. But this is pretty odd, honestly, because when you have a rebellious vassal, what do you normally do if you're an Assyrian king? You break holes in the wall of their capital city and you take that rebellious vassal and you flay them and impale them. This did not happen to Hezekiah, so clearly something else is going on too. The Hebrew Bible also says that there was a terrible plague that hit the Assyrian army and basically killed all the people who were encamped in front of Jerusalem. And because of this, Sennacherib didn't take the city. The Hebrew Bible also suggests that Pharaoh Taharka of Egypt a guy from the 25th dynasty. So he's from the kings of Napata down in Kush, who took over Egypt late in the Third Intermediate Period. There was news that he was marching north to attack. And so, because of this, Sennacherib withdrew from Jerusalem, which, after all, is not that big a threat, in order to go and deal with this Egyptian invasion. Whatever it was probably something that was somewhat embarrassing for Sennacherib to admit because he doesn't really want to have to explain why he didn't take the city of Jerusalem. So he keeps his whole mention of this campaign very brief in the text so he doesn't have to explain. But in the art, you can pick what you depict. People aren't going to look at the art and be like, so where's the picture of you taking Jerusalem? Like, you're not going to do that. You're going to be like, wow, the siege of Lachish was amazing. The Assyrian army is so powerful. So this may be part of what's going on. So, Sennacherib was a powerful spy master with a great knowledge of Assyrian intelligence who worked closely with the Assyrian intelligence service. He had a lot of military successes, both against rebellious vassals and against external threats. He was also a powerful builder. He built this palace without rival. He built a lot of other things. He built fortifications. He built temples. He did a lot of stuff. However, Sennacherib was very clear on the fact that disaster could come at any time. He knew that his father had died unexpectedly during a military campaign, and that could happen to him. He knew that there was always intrigue in the royal court, and something could happen to him. Ultimately, it would be the intrigue in the royal court that would take him out. One of the things that we really see from the records that are left to us from the rule of Sennacherib is that he was strongly reliant on divination for information about Assyria's relationship with the gods. So we remember from earlier in the quarter that the Mesopotamian gods are not friendly people. You mostly hope that they will leave you alone and that they won't get too interested in you because they can't really be relied upon to be nice to you necessarily. Now, as an Assyrian king, you could at least trust that the god Ashur would be on your side and the goddess Ishtar would probably be on your side. Other than that, you didn't really know, and you also had the concern that if you displease the gods, they may remove you from kingship, as with the death of Sargon. So, how do you know how the gods feel about you right now? You have to rely on divination. Let's talk a little bit about omens and divination in Neo-Assyria. Here I'm drawing on part of the article from Franziska Rauschberg. We'll talk more about omens and divination next week, but we're just going to lay the groundwork here and talk about one of the types of divination that was the most popular in Neo-Assyria. What is divination? Divination is basically all the various ways of finding out what the gods want or are planning or are doing. You can find these things out by observing various naturally occurring omens, otherwise known as signs, or by actively looking for signs via things like extispecie, that's examining the internal organs of animals, or other strategies. So you can look for naturally occurring signs. You can also go looking for signs. Omens and signs were interpreted by professional diviners and omen specialists of many types. So you could be a specialist in extispecie, you could be a specialist in dream omens, you could be a specialist in astrological omens. There were all kinds of different specialists, and there were actually hundreds of them employed by the Assyrian court. Divination was also integral to many professions, such as medicine, the intelligence services, and the priesthood. So, in medicine, for example, if you're trying to figure out why someone is sick, you might look for what omens are around this person that might be affecting them, or that might be able to tell you why this person is ill. Magic and divination for the ancient Mesopotamians were fully integrated into science. They were considered to be part of science. Divination could tell you all kinds of different things, both on the large scale and on the small scale. So, on the national scale, divination could tell you things like, should we ally with this other nation? How well is our king doing? Is he going to die? What will happen to our kingdom in the future? Why are the gods currently angry with us? On a personal level, it could tell you pretty much anything. Should you build your house there? What's a lucky day to do my business deal? Why am I sick? Why are the gods angry with me? If the omens seem bad, the divination professionals who are interpreting them for you might be able to give you a ritual called an apotropaic ritual, which will drive off the bad omens. So you go to the professional, you're like, I'm having this problem, I don't know why. The professional will examine the omens about you and they'll be like, yeah, it seems like there's some bad omens floating around you. Here's a ritual you can do to try to get rid of this kind of bad karma and clean your slate so you can go on with life. There are a lot of different branches of the diviner's art in the ancient Middle East. These included extispicy, which is examining the livers and intestines of animals, astronomy or astrology, which involved interpreting the position of the stars and planets, examining abnormal births, interpreting dreams, examining people's facial structure, talking to ghosts, and interpreting a wide variety of other omens. So there's a lot of different stuff you could do. As you can see, some of these involve kind of naturally occurring signs like astronomy or looking at someone's facial structure, while other things require actually going looking for the signs, so examining the livers and intestines of animals or talking to ghosts. You have to actually do special rituals and do special things in order to do that. Divination was very, very important to the Neo-Assyrian kings. Kings Sennacherib and Esarhaddon are especially famous for constantly consulting diviners and trying to drive off bad omens with rituals large and small. During this time, astronomical omens were especially important. So let's talk a little bit about astronomical omens in ancient Assyria. The ancient Assyrians were very good astronomers. They would track the movements of the stars and planets, and they have left detailed records of their observations. One of the series of astronomical omens that we have is the Enuma Anu Enlil. This is a 70-plus tablet series of omens. Every tablet is just covered with lists and lists and lists of omens. These omens concern the moon, sun, planets, stars, and weather. Here are a couple of examples from tablets 16 to 19. If there's an eclipse and one cloud enters into another cloud, the gods will take away the intelligence of that land, the king of that land. His days are near. So if there's an eclipse and certain kinds of weather combined, the king's going to die. Well, that's a big deal. I would want to know that if I was the king. If the moon is dark at its top during a partial eclipse, the land and the totality of the people will be left over for all time. Now, this is a little ambiguous. What does it mean to be left over for all time? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. The astronomer can pick. If the moon is covered and completely obscured, so a complete eclipse, and it stays that way till dawn, then they actually give several different options in the Enuma Anu Enlil. Misfortune will occur everywhere in the land, or the land will suffer severe famine. So those would both be very bad things, or the reign of the land will be spared from defeat. A positive thing? So when you are an astrologer to the king, I guess you can pick which one of these you want to report. If you see that there was a complete eclipse and you're writing to the king, what did this mean? I guess you can pick whether you think this is a bad thing or a good thing. Now, remember this one here. If there's an eclipse and certain kind of weather, the king is going to die. Okay? There was a lot of thought that if you could see a full eclipse in your region, the king in that region was going to die. Now, if there was an eclipse in a completely different region, like say there's a total eclipse in Urartu, that should be affecting the king of Urartu, not the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria doesn't have to worry about that. However, as Assyria is getting bigger and bigger, you can see a total eclipse from Assyria more and more often because Assyria is just bigger, right? So more and more, this is starting to be problematic. So what is the king going to do? As we discussed, if you have a bad omen, you might be able to do a ritual to get rid of this ominousness. So if there's an eclipse that indicates the king of Assyria is going to die, they would do what's called the substitute king ritual. How did this work? They would hold a fake coronation for someone else as the shepherd of Assyria. They would give them a queen and a court, and meanwhile, the actual king would change his title to being a farmer, and he would not live in the main palace, but he would continue to do all the actual ruling business. He just wouldn't hold court, and he would let the substitute king pretend to reign. The substitute king would reign for 100 days. Now, the thought was that the bad omen should strike the substitute king and not the real king. However, if by the end of the 100 days they hadn't died yet, they would be executed in order to make sure that the bad omen was carried away. During his rule, Esarhaddon did this ritual at least 3 times, and Sennacherib did it at least twice. So they were both very concerned about this. So there were multiple 100-day periods when these guys were hiding out, pretending not to be the king of Assyria, and letting someone else try to take the fall for this terrible omen. Now, here is a report from Nabut-Zeruleshir, an official, and he's writing to the king about what's going on with the substitute king. So he's writing back to report. To the quote-unquote farmer, my lord. So that's the new fake title of the real king. Your servant Nabut-Zeruleshir. Good health to my lord. May Nabu and Marduk bless my lord for years. I wrote down whatever signs there were, be they celestial, terrestrial, or of malformed births, and had them recited in front of the god Shamash, one after the other. The substitute king and queen were treated with wine, washed with water, and anointed with oil. I had those birds cooked and made them eat them. So part of what this guy did was he seems to have looked at the internal organs of birds and then had these birds with the bad omens cooked and made the substitute king queen eat them. And he also does other things to get the substitute king queen to take the omens on themselves. The substitute king of the land of Akkad took the signs on himself by eating this stuff. So, this is the kind of stuff going on here. Sometimes the substitute king was just some random servant. Sometimes it was someone who was actually powerful in the court who had been causing problems for Sennacherib or Esarhaddon. They would put this person in this extremely honorable position as fake king of Assyria, and nobody could really complain about it because, of course, it's better for this random person to die than for the actual king of Assyria to die, right? So it was a handy way to also get rid of some problematic elements in the court. So, this gives you kind of an idea of what's going on during the time of Neo-Assyria. We saw Sargon in his 8th campaign, his military success. We saw the growth of the Assyrian intelligence service. We saw Sennacherib's victories at Lachish and how he depicts them very carefully in his art, but kind of glosses over the whole campaign in his text, because for whatever embarrassing reason, he didn't take the city of Jerusalem. And we've also seen the kinds of omens that the Neo-Assyrian kings relied upon and one of the big rituals they used to try to drive off bad omens. So, next time we meet, we will be talking about the Neo-Babylonian and Persian periods. Have a wonderful break, and don't forget to do your Thanksgiving week assignment.